Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Tenyola Shibowale. The World Health Organization is warning that Africa is facing a growing risk of outbreaks of diseases that spread from animals to people. It says these outbreaks have increased by more than 60% over the last decade, with a large spike recorded since 2019. Most of the cases have involved the Ebola virus, other hemorrhagic diseases, dengue fever, anthrax, and monkeypox. The WHO's regional director for Africa, Mashidiso Moeti, said there's a need to act now to stop Africa becoming a hotspot for emerging infectious diseases. The WHO says among the reasons behind the spread of the diseases are rapid population growth, increased demand for food derived from animals, and encroachment on wildlife habitats. The Economic Freedom Fighters plans to bring a motion of no confidence against South Africa's President, Cyril Ramaphosa. They say the party wants the president to step down amid a scandal about millions of US dollars found stuffed in the furniture at his farm. Addressing the media on Thursday, the EFF leader, Julius Malema, says they will approach the courts of South Africa to compel Parliament to conduct a thorough investigation of all crimes allegedly committed by the president. With the country's unemployment rate so high, petrol increasing, and load shedding, Malema has called on South Africans to join in on the national shutdown that will see no school or workplaces open. Malema insists that President Ramaphosa has violated the people of South Africa and as such must step down.
When it comes to motion of no confidence, our approach is going to be a bit different in that we are going to speak to all political parties in Parliament, including the DA and the ANC. It's not some people in the ANC. We are going to write an official communique to the ANC and ask them to agree with us that a motion of no confidence must be passed. I will tell you why. President Ramaphosa has confessed to his caucus, his own faction, that he's got no defense on the money, that the money was illegal, and that he's got no answers, and therefore he must step down. It is alleged that, amongst others, it was Zaman Sol, Oscar Mabuyane, Stayelan Daveni, and them, who said to him he must not resign, they will defend him. But the president has made a concession to his faction and to his core that he has got no moral defense to those things. That's why you see the president can answer both to parliamentary questions or to any question. The president has got no reason not to answer because he has not been charged. So he can't say the matter is, when the matter is in court, they say sub judice. He can't say the matter is sub judice. So the president has got no answer and he has made that concession. And is held there by a faction that feels, the likes of Lamola and them, that feels that if he leaves, they are going to become a collateral damage, and therefore they will have to live with him. So we are confident that the ANC people will themselves accept that the motion of no confidence must be put on the president if he does not step down.
Newsroom.
Of no confidence in President Ramaphosa. We will approach the courts to compel President going further, saying the current cohorts of judges.
As to security matters, at least 31 people, including children, are now known to have been killed in the last 1 week during renewed fighting in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The United Nations says intense clashes between the Congolese army and several rebel groups have spread to the Beni territory, where 5 bodies were recovered on Wednesday. Locals say the death toll might be even higher as dozens of people are still missing. More than 700,000 people have fled their homes in Ituri and North Kivu provinces since the beginning of this year. This brings to 6 million the total number of people displaced by armed conflict in the DRC, which the UN says is among the worst humanitarian crises in the world. The Mozambican government has declared 5 days of national mourning following the death of former Angolan President José Eduardo dos Santos. The mourning period started at midnight today. During the 5 days, the national flag will be flown at half-mast in the country and in all diplomatic representations abroad. The decision was taken on Wednesday night by the Council of Ministers, which met in an extraordinary session. According to Ludivina Bernardo, the Deputy Minister of Industry and Commerce, José Eduardo dos Santos earned at a national and international level high prestige and esteem, especially in the context of the fight for racial equality against apartheid. In favor of freedom, dignity, and economic and social progress of the countries of Southern Africa and the African continent in general. Mr. Dos Santos died in a Barcelona hospital on Friday last week, where he had been undergoing medical treatment. He was president of Angola for nearly 40 years until 2017. And in West Africa, Ghana's Statistics Office has announced the country's annual inflation rate, which hit 29.8% in June, the highest since December 2003. Surging food and commodity prices are said to be responsible for the spike. The government has now turned to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout plan expected to be worth $1.5 billion. If granted, this will be the 17th time the country has borrowed from the IMF since independence in 1957. Ghana's total debt is estimated to be more than two-thirds of GDP, and an increase in its debt profile could harm future generations and scare investors. Economists believe a restructuring of debt and reduction in subsidies and cost of governance could help ease the pressure. The finance minister is expected to present a mid-year budget review before Parliament this month. Joining us now is Joy News TV correspondent George Riafe. Thanks so much for joining us on the program. It's a 19-year high. How are analysts digesting this data?
Well, if you look at the headline numbers, I mean, they are quite high for an economy like Ghana, that the Bank of Ghana is looking at a single-digit inflation rate of not more than 10% in a year. So the numbers are high. But again, if you do a trend analysis of what has happened over the past 2 months or 3 months, we've seen the rate of increase kind of declining. For instance, if you look at the month of April to May, it went up by about 4.1% in terms of the rate of increase. And in June, it dropped to about 3.1%. So it appears that just like what the Bank of Ghana is projecting, we are kind of reached our peak, and the numbers might be slowing in terms of our inflation rate, and therefore it appears that the worst is over, and going forward we could see the numbers declining, even though it jumped to 29.8%. That is quite high, but analysts are looking forward to the numbers trending down because of we are approaching the harvest season, and food cost has been one of the main drivers, and therefore it's likely that going into the last quarter of this year, the numbers will be declining.
But how's this likely to impact talks with IMF regarding support?
I think that we were privy to some engagement that happened between government and the Bank of Ghana. And it appears that the IMF itself also have come to agree that we have reached our peak in terms of the continuous spike that we've seen over the past 3 months. So it appears that on the monetary side, we are doing what we are supposed to do to try and bring the situation under control. The problem is a fiscal situation. So that means that they may have to fast track negotiations to ensure that whatever that program that they'll put forward, that could help tame inflation significantly. And we're looking at somewhere around next year if there should be any program in place. So in terms of the medium to long term output, they see inflation rate coming down significantly.
And George, just before I let you go, how are ordinary Ghanaian citizens reacting to this?
I mean, inflation is measuring a past event, but I remember way back in school, they would tell us that inflation is robbing your money. And for many people, you've seen many ordinary Ghanaians connecting to these numbers because when they go to the market, they see prices going up each and every day. And that one way or the other, it tells us that the cost of living has gone up. And for the labor front, the push for government to compensate them by reviewing their salaries. There is something that initially government agreed to pay them, that is cost of living allowance. And most of these labor unions are on strike as we speak right now. If government doesn't pay them that 20% of their salary as a buffer. So there is more of pockets of agitations among workers and even for ordinary Ghanaians complaining how the situation has gotten worse under this government, and they think the government has to do better than what they are doing to cushion them when it comes to the rising prices of goods and services.
All right, then Joy News TV correspondent George Wiafe, thank you so much for the update. And to other stories, Cote d'Ivoire's President Alassane Ouattara has received his predecessors, Henri Konan Bedie and Laurent Gbagbo, for a summit aimed at advancing reconciliation after the crisis of 2010 to 2011 and 2020, but also to prepare for the upcoming elections in the West African nation. The idea of the meeting between the three men is one of the recommendations of the political dialogue between the government and the opposition held earlier this year to calm the political climate in the country. The country has experienced several political crises in recent years involving these three men who have been at the forefront of the political scene for decades. In 2010, the presidential duel between Laurent Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara led to a post-election crisis that left some 3,000 people dead and led to Gbagbo's arrest in April 2011. In 2020, electoral violence during the presidential elections left 85 people dead and 500 injured. The election, boycotted by Mr. Bedie, saw the re-election of President Alassane Ouattara for a third controversial term deemed unconstitutional by the opposition. The last meeting of the Big Three, as some call them, was more than 10 years ago. It was before the first round of the 2010 presidential elections. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has held what he calls substantive progress in ensuring the export of Ukrainian food products through the Black Sea. He told reporters at the UN headquarters in New York that a critical step forward has been made to ensuring the safe and secure export of Ukrainian food products. He adds that the aim of all parties is not just an agreement between Russia and Ukraine, but an agreement for the world. According to the United Nations, the blockade of Ukrainian seaports as a result of the Russian war against Ukraine has worsened the food crisis in Nigeria and other nations in Africa.
We have seen a critical step forward to ensuring the safe and secure export of Ukrainian food products through the Black Sea. In a world darkened by global crisis, today at last we have a ray of hope. I traveled to Moscow and Kyiv to propose solutions for both problems. Every day since, we have been working around the clock with intense behind-the-scenes talks with countless moving parts. More technical work will now be needed to materialize today's progress, but the momentum is clear. In the end, the aim of all parties is not just an agreement between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, but an agreement for the world. People are still dying, fighting is still raging. But hopeful news from Istanbul shows the importance of dialogue. Let us take inspiration from that ray of hope to help light a way to a desperately needed negotiated solution for peace in line with UN Charter and international law. There was substantive agreement on many aspects, namely the questions related to the mechanisms of control, related to the system of coordination, and relating to the questions of mining, in relation to many of the concrete, I would say, substantive aspects. But of course, this was a first meeting. The progress was extremely encouraging. We hope that now the delegations are coming back to their capitals, and we hope that the next steps will allow us to come to a formal agreement. I never like to make predictions because the predictions usually are never respected. We are hoping that we'll be able to reconvene very soon, I'm sure next week, and hopefully we'll be able to have a final agreement. But, as I said, we still need a lot of goodwill and commitment by all parties. They have shown it. I'm encouraged, I'm optimistic, but it's not yet fully done. I think we cannot overestimate the importance of this agreement.
Back here in Nigeria, United Nations Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq says UN humanitarian partners have delivered food and nutrition assistance to 26,000 people in the past week in the town of Ran, which is in the northeast. He says that Ran has been the site of repeated attacks by non-state armed groups, during which hundreds of civilians internally displaced people as well as aid workers have been killed. He adds that humanitarian agencies have been forced to reduce their footprints there in recent years.
Humanitarian partners have delivered food and nutrition assistance to 26,000 people in the past week in the town of Ran, which is in the country's northeast. This town is one of the most challenging environments for aid workers in the region. It has been the site of repeated attacks by non-state armed groups, during which hundreds of civilians, internally displaced people, as well as aid workers have been killed. Humanitarian agencies have been forced to reduce their footprint there in recent years. For example, a major international health partner suspended its work in Ran last month, following the heightened risk of attacks targeting civilians and aid assets. With the lean season now underway, some 4.1 million people urgently need food assistance across Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states in northeast Nigeria. However, due to funding shortages, only about 1.2 million people there were receiving food aid as of the end of May. Aid agencies have reached some 1.8 million people during the first quarter of 2022, despite the fact that this year's humanitarian response plan, which requires $1.1 billion, is less than 25% funded.
And over in the Gambia, a judge has sentenced to death the country's former intelligence chief, Yankuba Bajie, and 4 other security agents for the killing in 2016 of a political activist in the final days of brutal rule under former president Yahya Jammeh. The activist, Mbrima Solo Sendeng, a leading figure in the opposition United Democratic Party, had been arrested during anti-government protest. He died in prison 2 days later, having been beaten and tortured. His death galvanized a wave of popular anger that eventually led to the ousting of President Jammeh after 22 years in power. Mr. Jammeh fled in 2017 to Equatorial Guinea, where he remains in exile. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the world is in deep trouble, and so too are the Sustainable Development Goals. Addressing the high-level segment of the Economic and Social Council's high-level political forum on sustainable development, the Secretary General said time is running out, but there's still hope, and identified 4 areas for immediate action.
And so too are the Sustainable Development Goals. Time is running out. But there is still hope, because we know what we need to do. End the senseless, disastrous wars now, unleash a renewable energy revolution now, invest in people and build a new social contract now, and deliver a new global deal to rebalance power and financial resources and enable all developing countries to invest in the SDGs. Let's come together, starting today, with ambition, resolve, and solidarity to rescue the SDGs before it is too late. The ripple effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine have hit amid a fragile and uneven recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, while the climate emergency is gathering pace. Some countries are investing in recovery through a transition to renewable energy and sustainable development, but others are unable to do so because of deeply rooted structural challenges and inequalities at global and national levels.
The U.S. Department of Justice says 2 Congolese nationals arrested and indicted in the U.S. last year for trafficking ivory, rhino horn, and pangolin skulls have pleaded guilty to the charges. Both men in their early 30s were indicted last November on 11 counts related to trafficking wildlife from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Seattle in the U.S. According to a DOJ statement, in pleading guilty, both defendants admit that beginning in November 2019, they agreed to smuggle elephant ivory, white rhinoceros horn, and pangolin skulls to the United States. They allege to have worked with a middleman to smuggle 3 packages of ivory tusks cut into pieces and labeled as wood. A similar scheme was used to send rhino horn. Their sentence is due on the 1st of November. Egypt is reclaiming its Suez Canal mudflat to use for an industrial hub. Once known as a graveyard for tanks, an Egyptian mudflat east of the Suez Canal is being reclaimed for what its backers hope will be a vast industrial zone for exports and domestic market.
Port Said Industrial Zone sits on the Mediterranean Sea, 7 kilometers away from the city whose name it bears. It is one of 4 such zones under construction along the canal, a transit route for about 15% of global shipping traffic. Egypt runs a large trade deficit and has struggled to develop an industrial base. Economists say many of the industrial parks it has so far tried to create lie semi-vacant, partly because they are far from urban areas where workers live. The new industrial zone's developers, private Egyptian companies, plus the military-owned National Service Projects Organization, NSPO, are hoping its position near Port Said City and a new city being built to the east means it will succeed where other similar projects have faltered.
Our company has been assigned to develop an industrial zone in East Port Said. This area stretches over 16 million square kilometers and is in a genius location because the factories here can ship their product to Europe in 48 hours. As we all witnessed during the pandemic, the supply chains from China have been interrupted or halted. The East Port Said company presents itself as an alternative, a smaller scale alternative for situations where the supply chain from China is halted.
مع الصين تم قطعها أو
Until recently, the area was a waterlogged flatland notorious for bogging down military vehicles during the wars between Egypt and Israel. Israeli forces reached the Suez Canal in 1967 and stayed there until Egypt pushed them back in 1973.
The Armed Forces Engineering Authority improved the soil in this area and used a technology that produced great results by packing the soil with sand and putting hoses underground to remove the groundwater. This made East Port Said not only suitable for small-sized industries but also for medium-sized industries.
Over the last 4 years, the NSPO has packed down soil and removed groundwater from an area covering 8 million square meters, solidifying the ground enough to handle light and medium industries. 4 phases totaling 16 million square meters are due to be completed over 15 years.
Everything that's being done is part of a comprehensive vision for the area. There's an agricultural area, a port and logistics area, an industrial zone, where we are now, and a residential area, all of which lie on the borders of the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean Sea. This is part of a comprehensive plan to develop the entire area, which hasn't been developed for many years. This is the future of Egypt.
Its first phase target is to lure Egypt's automotive firms by setting up painting, printing, and dashboard producing lines. Its first factory, Nerik, which will make carriages for trains and metro lines, is due for completion by June 2023. Construction on other factories is expected to begin by late 2022.
And that's the program. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shibowale. Bye for now.